because it just, the Lord just brought it to mind. The scriptures, brothers and sisters, are unashamedly, unabashedly, unequivocally clear about a day and a time when God will assimilate his chosen people. And we don't need to imagine how that assimilation will flesh itself out. The how that God has given us is about a spiritual establishment. Man has, for generations, tried to figure out the how and when in the wrong context. In other words, mainly through earthly timelines and events. And the scriptures are fairly concise about a cycle within the context of man's existence. And that cycle always finds itself repeating when the spiritual condition of man in his heart, as it is brought into the, we could call it brought against the plumb line of God's purpose, or weighed out on the scale of God's purpose. So we see, even in any history, any global history view will give you some indication of this cycle in the midst of man. So I would encourage you not to be looking outside of the spiritual work of God for this next phase of fulfillment. Now, my caveat there is, will it play out in the physical realm and in our world, and will there ultimately be places and events that directly correlate to the fulfillment of God's purpose? Absolutely. Absolutely. But if you fix your eyes there, then the work that God intends to finish and complete or fulfill in your inner man and in the midst of his people will never be seen. So if you're focused in the wrong place, you will actually find yourself to be an outsider in the fulfillment. So that is not actually what I intended to share, but briefly, what I did intend to share in relation to the assimilation of God's people is that I was very reminiscent of both Joel chapters 2 and 3, where the army of God is brought together to march forth. They line up in order, in righteousness, and according to the command and the authority that they are given. There are similar images in other prophetic writings, Revelation being another one. So my point here is that now is the time to really stand up and stand straight, to stand firm on the rock that we have proclaimed to be the true foundation of God's kingdom. There is a change in the demeanor, even in an army and in a time of preparation for war or battle. There is a time when there may be war and when there are skirmishes here and there is very evidently an enemy and its allies, and the coalition of let's say the good versus evil, the coalition of good and righteousness, and those are the generalities that are known about the upcoming or the ensuing engagement. So then there are many imaginations and ideas of how that battle is going to play out and where it's going to play out and who will be the major players and what will be the major victories or losses that take place in its midst. And those will be the matters of discussion in the midst of the ranks of the soldiers from the highest to the lowest. But all that is looking forward. All of that is in preparation for. Now I tell you, when the day of battle comes, there is a reconciliation that takes place in the hearts of men that is very different. Because your life is at stake, and you will enter into an engagement that may very well In fact, it will claim your life, because your life will have to be given before you ever lay it down. So we've even seen throughout the history of the, governments and armies, there's a labeling for those who wince away from battle before it begins, and that's a deserter. Some do so. The penalty for desertion was death in almost every army that's out there. It was counted to be treason against your allotted place. And now, well, let me tell you, there is such a thing. There is such a thing in the midst of the ranks of God's people. There is a treasonous potential to turn away. It's the very thing that the apostles and the prophets warned about when they said, many will fall away. Many's hearts will grow cold. And so my sense, rather than speaking about prophetic generalities, my sense is that we have literally stepped into a time where a very sharp line of demarcation has to be drawn out. I'm talking about the same kind of line that when Moses came down from the mountain and he spoke with Aaron and the Levites, and he said, you're either with me or you're against me. And he drew that line, and the Levites among all the tribes gathered to Moses. And so God said, well, I'm going to set these guys apart. And he sent them out to do a really terrible thing in the midst of God's people. But that line, once it had been drawn, was forever in God's purview, and from God's point of view. That line of demarcation never, he marked it out as eternal. Eternal. And he set that people apart, the Levites apart, for himself. Now, if we cannot see how that applies to what God would have his own people be in the midst of the nations, when we use words like holy and set apart, then we don't really understand how serious God is about what he's doing. And if there is one thing in the world that has blurred the line, let me first say what it is not. It's not the governments of men. It's not the depravity of man. It's not the murderers and the thieves and the adulterers. It is those who have a false idea and false claim of who God is and what his purpose is. That's why when Israel had been set apart in such a way, and Jesus came in their midst, and he saw those who were hindering others from entering into the kingdom or from even being able to be aware of it. Not only did he say, you keep others from it, you also will be kept out of it. He also said to the same people, Sodom and Gomorrah will be better off than you. He said to the same people, it would have been better if you had never been born. He said to the same people, it would be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and for you to be cast in the midst of the sea. For you will surely find yourselves in the abyss. That's how serious God is about this. Now, my words here are not meant to bring personal conviction of misstep or sin or anything to any person, but rather that we have a clear, our vision must be clear in the time of confusion. When all the dust of the world is tossed up, our vision must be clear. Do you know where it's going to be clear? Not on the earth, not where everything's being scratched up and stirred up. Where then? Well, let me ask you, where was Noah's vision clear? As he swam in the depths when the floods rose up? No. As the ark of God rose above the seas of judgment. Was he taken out of the earth? No, he was not. But he was set to be raised above everything, the flood that was coming below. Now, if we claim this sweet love of Jesus, this walk with Christ that is so beneficial, let us not only adhere ourselves to the goodness of God, but let us be all aware and sober-minded of God's purpose. Does God have some plan that is good for us? I believe so. But it will never, the goodness of God towards his people, especially in their life on the earth, will never supersede. It can never supersede. He's the fulfillment of his eternal plan. It just can't. It's not a possibility. And if we want to know who God is really seeking, he is seeking those who are seeking the fulfillment of his eternal plan, who have fixed their eyes upon it, who have seen its value and found it to be the treasure to be most desired beyond all others. Beyond all others. So as Brother Emmanuel said earlier, what's our choice? What is laid out before us? In this light, the circumstances of life, the hardships of life, the difficulties of life, they literally break away like scales that cling on to us. And so do the things that we think we have to have and pursue and feel good about. All of it pales in comparison. None of it can compare. Life itself, physical life itself in this body, doesn't even have a chance against it. That's where, as Brother Emmanuel said earlier, that's where God doesn't care about it. We get so offended when someone says, well, God doesn't care about our life, when all the teaching we've ever heard in the church is how much God cares about our life and our well-being. Well, now we know how the priorities in the midst of the church and the teachings that have come through the pulpits from generations and generations has so far misled and dumbed down and numbed the minds and the hearts of God's people so that they could be helpless, hopeless, and weak at the appointed time. And there will be many who are found to be in such a place. So, as Brother Emmanuel said, let's rise up. Let's not make any more excuses. Let's not leave room for any more excuses. Now, hear me clearly. This is not about being legalistic in our way of life. It is about being completely settled and firmly planted in the right foundation. Do you feel like you don't know what that is? Do you not know? Do you feel like you're on shaky ground? Is there some level of uncertainty in your heart as to whether or not you are established and planted in this rock? Then come to those who stand on it and ask how to be firmly set. It doesn't honor me. It doesn't honor Emmanuel. It honors God. It honors God. I can assure you, brothers and sisters, we only want to honor God. We only want to see the purpose of God, which is all good, righteous, just, and loving, fulfilled. And if that's not your view of God's plan or how it's being fulfilled, well, keep going until you can see it like that. Because it will be those who lose heart, whose hearts grow cold, who turn away from being able to see the fulfillment of that vision. But you are blessed among many to have even a few among you who can see such a vision and strive for it. Now, our desire is that you strive for it as well. We're not looking for placement or even at this point for the full development and settlement, but that it is being reached out for, longed for, and pursued. Same thing that Jesus encouraged his disciples and those who were listening to him when the disciples of John the Baptist and said, "Are you really the Messiah?" And he said, "Let me tell you who will see the kingdom." Let me tell you who will enter in, and let me give you a small glimpse of what their glory will be. Far greater than what you have imagined. Far greater. Why? Not because they were pursuing that glory, but because they were pursuing the glorious one. The glorious one. That is our pursuit. That is our heart. So mark my words, the season of that straight line has been drawn. It has been drawn. And that demarcation of which we have been speaking for at least 5 to 7 years now will become blatantly clear in almost every circumstance of life. Where God has poised us to be the display and splendor of his glory. Now, it will begin to manifest. Now, it will begin to manifest.
Glory to God.
The Lord, sorry guys, didn't mean to blast out there, took over me a little bit, but this is our calling. This is why. This is where we're going. Let's be all joyful in it. Let's be all excited about it. That doesn't even have to happen through discussion so much. I mean, that's good. It needs to come in practice.
Yes.
It needs to come with faith and obedience. And that will bear fruit. It will bear fruit. In the same way that when you plant that particular seed in the ground, it will follow its orders because they are divinely given. They were divinely created to do it. So too, when that seed of faith, now know what faith is and understand what James said. Faith without works, without practice is dead. It will never produce life. Let's see that seed flourish. Nurture that seed.
Help us.
And let the fruit bear forth. Let the life change. Let God see the benefits in his own garden. Lord, we bless you. We thank you for these things, Lord, for your faithfulness, for your love, for your goodness. Lord, for your unwavering purpose. That same purpose of which it is said of you, you are the same today, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. To the end of the age, until everything has been consummated, until all is fulfilled. Lord, may we find ourselves to be, because of our love and obedience and commitment to you, those who are like that mighty army, who stand shoulder to shoulder. Not one is out of rank, not one is misstepped, because they follow the cadence and the rhythm and the flow and the power of your Spirit. None will be able to overcome. All will be destroyed in their path. They will leave the path of fire and judgment, but it will be full of righteousness, peace, and joy. That's the allotment for your people. That is their war path. And we honor it, Lord. And we bless your holy name. Now let each one, every heart here, Lord, be prepared. Be prepared. Be willing. Be found to be all willing. And we entrust those lives with the all-sufficient grace that comes from your throne through your Spirit to continue and to finish that good work which you have begun. Bless your holy name.
Mm.